Hello class, my name is Jane and today I want to talk to you about an amazing concert held at the Central Branch of Brooklyn's Public Library. Ta-da! As part of New York's Neighborhood Concert Series, which is hosting more than 50 free concerts in the 5 boroughs, the Hugo Wolf Quartet will be performing Beethoven's String Quartet in F Major, Opus 18, Number 1, and Johannes Brahms String Quartet No. 3 in B-flat Major, Opus 67. Now, before I talk to you about the specific pieces they played, I'd like to give some personal and historical context to enhance your understanding and enjoyment. We'll start with the ever-famous Ludwig van Beethoven. He was born in Bonn, Germany in 1770 and died in 1827. He established himself as a musician in his early 20s amidst the noblesse and studied music under an assortment of teachers, including Haydn in Vienna. In his early 20s, he began to lose his hearing and conversed with his friends via writing. Over 200 books filled with conversations between him and others still remain in existence, but their credibility has been questioned since it became known that one of Beethoven's acquaintances, Anton Schindler, may have tampered or destroyed some of them. Our textbook discusses the dual role of Beethoven in his straddling of 18th century classical style and 19th century romantic style. In technique, he was devoted to the principles of classical music, a characteristic attributed to the fact that he studied under classical composer Haydn. However, in his style and emotional flares, he was very romantic. The classical era, as we have studied, valued a very natural, simplistic style. This may have been due to the rise in popularity of public concert halls at the time, which introduced a less musically sophisticated audience to music. However, at the same time, the classical era believed in pleasure, entertainment, and the pursuit of happiness, and this was manifested in the number of pleasing varieties and contrasts found in classical music. Unlike the very ornate, very stable Baroque melodies, classical music was more homophonic and more flexible in terms of dynamics, rhythms, and etc. Finally, classical music often utilized very distinct rests or cadences between different movements or phrases of music and had distinct transitions that led up to the new theme or section. The Romantic era was born out of the French Revolution and against the backdrop of industrialism. It was seen as a sort of escapism. People were presented every day with the cold machinery of the Industrial Revolution and the harsh living conditions that came with it. In music, they found a place for emotional expression, and music became more effusive, dramatic, and tumultuous during this time. Sustained climaxes were featured, as well as a thematic unitary nature, where new variations of the same theme were repeatedly reintroduced in a piece. This type of repetition is different from the variation forms that appeared in classical music, because the romantic themes are more fragmentary and appear more irregularly. Johannes Brahms was born a few years after Beethoven's death in Hamburg, Germany. He spent most of his career in Vienna and was known to be a great fan of Beethoven, Mozart, and Haydn. He collected much of their work and had a bust of Beethoven in his home that would stand over him as he composed. He never married, but he did have an intimate relationship with composer Clara Schumann, who encouraged and supported him. After her husband was admitted to an insane asylum, Brahms stepped in to help take care of her and her household. Much of his early work, and some of his later work as well, were destroyed by Brahms, who was a perfectionist. Many people have declared him a champion of pure classical music. Although Brahms lived during the Romantic era, he and a group of other prominent musicians advocated a return to the classical era. He composed many pieces that followed traditional classical forms, like the sonata form, theme and variations, and the rondo. The two main groups advocating for and against the Romantic style of music was led by Johannes Brahms of the so-called conservatives and Franz Liszt of the so-called radicals. So now that we've covered some basics about the composers and the historical and musical context that they lived in, let's explore the specific pieces that the Hugo Wolf Quartet performed. It's estimated that this particular string quartet was composed between 1798 and 1800, making it a good example of Beethoven's first period of work, which emphasized a very classic style as used by Haydn. We haven't talked about it in class yet, but most musicians and historians have divided Beethoven's work into 3 periods of musical style. This string quartet is purely instrumental and has no lyrics. It showcases 2 violins, 1 cello, and 1 viola. There are 4 movements: Allegro con brio, Adagio affettuoso ed appassionato, Scherzo allegro molto, and Allegro. You may remember some of these terms as simple identifications of tempo. What deserves particular attention is number 3. Although Beethoven by and large did use classical templates for his music, he veered away radically in one respect by replacing the standard minuet that appears in the 3rd movement with a scherzo, a very fast, rushing movement. So now let us listen to a quick clip of the 1st movement of this piece. I think you'll find that you can identify several quintessentially classical elements within it. I will try to help you decipher the classical elements as we listen. So we're starting off with a relatively quiet, slightly brisk pace that builds up into a crescendo and speeds up in tempo as well. We'll get a bit quiet again and then have a few noticeable roller coaster swings in the dynamics. And then there's this cadence right here where all the music halted and now we transitioned into a different melody. So from this 30-second clip, you can hear the flexibility in dynamics, rhythm, and tempo. So that was a pretty large variety of different melodies showcased, and you heard the distinct cadence, and you also heard Beethoven's trademark urgency propelling the music to greater and greater heights. And about the same time, even though it does feature so many different elements, it's already a bit toned down from the ornate Baroque style that it descends from. Now let's look at Johannes Brahms' piece. This piece was composed in 1875 and features 2 violins, 1 cello, and 1 viola. It is also purely instrumental and has 4 movements, which were vivace, andante, agitato allegretto non troppo, and poco allegretto con variazioni. Brahms dedicated this piece of work to Professor Theodor Wilhelm Engelmann to express his gratitude because Engelmann had allowed Brahms to stay in his house once in Utrecht. This Opus 67 was his very last string quartet and swings between bright and sunny tunes to dramatic and dark melodies. We've covered a lot of history in the past few slides. It's an understatement to say that these men took music very seriously. Music was their life, what drove them from one stage to the next. Everything they believed in could be found in their compositions. Brahms' fight for a return to classical roots was caused by more than personal preference. It involved his entire ideology of music and human behavior. Likewise, Beethoven's mingling of classic and romantic influence is revealing of his inner character and ideology as well. Throughout the ages, people have understood music to be an indicator of their style, emotional disposition, and more. Why do you think that is? I leave you with 2 more discussion questions to ponder about, and the hope that you enjoyed this presentation. Thank you for listening.